Today, I'll be talking about diversity and how to welcome it to your yard. So, a lot of what I'll be talking about today is focusing on moth and butterfly hosts. So, that's the order Lepidoptera. So, a lot of our moths and butterflies have really close evolutionary relationships with plant species. So, you can imagine over long, long periods of time, these insects have evolved with plants. So, they only are hosted by a few different plants, and they had to be plants that were there during this whole history of these organisms. So it means that non-native plants just don't support the same diversity, especially of insects, um, that native plants do. So it's really important to focus on our native plants, which you hear us talk about all the time, but that's kind of the core of it. And the reason a bird observatory thinks so much about Lepidoptera, so butterflies, and moths, is that they're really important in food chains, especially for nesting birds. So even our birds like this red-eyed vireo that you're seeing in chow down on berries in the fall, when it's raising chicks, it is just feeding its chicks insects. And a disproportionate amount of those are caterpillars. So by supporting caterpillars, you're really supporting birds, especially during breeding season. They expand their diet during the fall and winter, but during that core breeding season, they really need those insects. So it's really important to be able to support a diversity and abundance of insects that can support them during this pretty intense time period. Because imagine, especially for female birds, they have to develop eggs, have a lot of different nutrients in their bodies, so they need to have more food and be able to put that into those eggs and be able to then be able, both males and females for most species do feed their young, so they need to be able to find those insects and get those babies fledged as fast as possible, because that's how they're as successful as possible. So but as much as I'll be focusing on this, I want to put out a caveat. So high numbers of hosted Lepidoptera are great, but we need a diversity. So a lot of our pollinators are specialists. So imagine things like monarchs. They're the famous example with milkweed. They only lay their eggs on milkweed, and their larvae only eat milkweed. And a lot of other species are like that too. So as good as it is to, and I'll really be hitting home kind of these mega host species, it's important to try to have a diversity of shapes, colors, and um, and different types of plants in general to be able to support as many as you need. But if you're only going to be able to plant a few, the ones I'll be talking about today are really a good place to start. And I'll also be pointing out which one of these that are good Lepidoptera hosts are also great for seed eating birds, because those are still important in the fall, especially in the fall and winter, when there clearly are not insects to eat. And in order to be able to support pollinators and Lepidoptera throughout the year, you need to have food for them throughout the year as well. So starting with spring, a lot of people don't think about trees and shrubs necessarily as nectar and pollen sources, but a lot of our willows are the first, some of the first flowering plants of anything available, really. And some of our other woody plants are as well. And while they don't host as many species as our shrubs and trees do, spring ephemerals are really a great pollen and nectar source as well. Through the summer, most traditional kind of your classic flowers are blooming, or native flowers are blooming rather, and some of the flowering shrubs continue into the summer. And then a lot of our herbaceous plants, so think of your asters, your goldenrods, are really doing amazing in fall. So you want that full life cycle to be supported, both in terms of pollen and nectar sources, for our bees and Lepidoptera species and be able to support each of their life stages. So even though I'll be talking about host species because that's what is most important for birds raising their young, it's not to forget about larvae don't happen in a vacuum. So caterpillars don't happen in a vacuum. They are part of a life cycle of moths and butterflies. So in order to have moths and butterflies, you need to be able to support them throughout the entire year. So I don't want to lose track of that, even though that isn't what I'll be focusing on today. So trees, if it's one of those things that it's really odd to think about because like growing up, I always was told especially for butterflies, you think about milkweed, you think about a lot of our flowering plants, our really showy flowering plants, and what actually hosts the most insects are Lepidoptera, are oak trees. Of all of the plant taxa that are out there in Wisconsin, oak trees are the biggest bang for your buck. And most of our trees don't do quite as well as oaks, but they do host a lot of Lepidoptera. And they also create the structures that birds need to nest, feed, and support their entire life cycle. So a lot of birds need trees to provide nesting locations and foraging locations and areas that may not be as easy to get for predators to find them. So having that structure is really important. And also, there's a growing body of research that the amount of biomass you have of native plants matters. And when you think about amount of biomass, so how much plant is growing in your yard, you get a lot of bang for your buck from your trees versus think about how many herbaceous plants you would have to plant in order to make up for a maple tree or an oak tree. So that's if there's nothing that like if you had to plant one thing in your yard, trees are the go-to one for both birds and Lepidoptera, and I'll be going through some of the best in a minute. But one thing I want to call out is large shrub and small tree. Those two blend together a lot when we talk about native plants. So a lot of our small trees can be shrubs if you don't prune them to be single stemmed. And so when you hear me talk about them, don't take these as hard and fast categories, except for our biggest trees, they aren't shrubs. And also even within a genera, so one group of plants, some individuals can be shrubs, some can be trees, and if you're talking about dogwoods, some of them can even be something that looks suspiciously like traditional flowers, but they actually are still woody plants. So I'll get to them in a second. So just like I mentioned earlier, our powerhouses of supporting biodiversity of both Lepidoptera, but also other insects, are the oaks. And there are many different species in Wisconsin, and there's probably one that fits your growing conditions. So I will be highlighting 3, but please reach out to us if you have a site condition that doesn't seem to quite match what I'm describing, because they're found in a lot of different conditions in Wisconsin, and sometimes it means just finding a little different fit. With those different species, they can handle a lot of different sites. The acorns are great food for birds and mammals. Things like crows and jays really love the nuts and of pretty much everything, but especially acorns. And the biggest caution I would have to folks growing oaks is oak wilt. So this has become more of an issue relatively recently. So it's really important to reduce the risk of this disease by pruning when it's not an active period of growth. So this is late fall is a great time to prune your oaks because they aren't actively growing or taking up nutrients. So it's makes them less susceptible to this disease. Also, the white oak group versus red oaks tend to be more resistant to this disease. And in case you want to start really small, we will be, I mean, small innocent trees, not as an impact. We'll be giving away 2 to 3 year old trees, oak trees on April 22nd for Earth Day. So it's really hard for me to choose oaks that are the best oaks. Really, I could have picked almost any species, but these are 3 good examples, and they live in, like the other examples of different taxa I'll be showing, they um, they grow in slightly different conditions. So starting out with bur oak, they tend to grow in pretty much everywhere except really flooded conditions. They need full sun. They have relatively slower growth rate compared to some of our other oaks, compared to, say, swamp oak, which does better in wetter conditions and can handle part to full sun and has more moderate growth rate. The only thing that I do want to kind of point out with these guys is they prefer acidic conditions. So if you have alkaline soil, you might want to think about hybrid oaks or a different oak. And then chinkapin are a little smaller. Again, need that full sun. Again, this time they prefer alkaline soil that's not wet and have a relatively slow growth rate. So these are just 3 different examples of all species that do really well hosting Lepidoptera. And you'll see throughout this presentation, I'll have these little symbols by the different plants, because right now, during our sale, you can order bur oaks right now. And in the fall, our supplier will be able to have swamp white and chinkapin oaks in the fall sale. So if you want to add that to your cart as soon as, or let us know if you want to put in your order for later. So one of the next kind of top plants for Lepidoptera hosting species at 340 are prunus species. I keep on trying to figure out a good way to talk about them holistically, but these tend to be cherries and plums, a lot of our fruiting types, the native fruiting type species. And I'll go through some examples and you can see why there's not one blanket name you can easily call them like you do with oaks. So these guys can either be single, most of them can either be single stemmed or multi-stemmed. So you can see in this example here, this is kind of a bushier version, but depending on how it's been pruned, it can also be a single stem tree type growth pattern. They're great fruit for birds. They're a great host for Lepidoptera species. They have beautiful blooms, as you can see here, and they're just have a lot of different functions, and a lot of them have edible fruit for people, which is kind of cool. So here are 3 examples, and you can see why with names like plum, cherry, and choke cherry, it's hard to come up with one blanket term for what all of them sound like. So plums, our supplier typically puts them into a single stem version, even though in nature they can have other growth patterns. They prefer well-drained soil, but they can tolerate a lot of different conditions and have a moderate growth rate. And for some of these species, there's a trade-off between longevity and growth rate. So some of them are shorter lived and faster growing, like our sand cherries are more in that category, and to some extent pin cherries, while some of the medium growth species have a little bit more longevity. So you can see with each one of these, they have different, they typically have white blooms. They're very showy. A lot of times, like you can see in the American plum here, the flowers come out before leaves. So it's very showy, very aesthetically pleasing, and they are also great migration fuel for our birds. So all of these have fruit that birds love. So chokecherries, plums, all of these guys are just great for birds. They love them. We have a Swainson's thrush up here, um, chowing down, and um, that is one warning, is most of these are also edible for humans, but a lot of times it's tough to beat the birds out there unless you net them, so you have to trade off how much you want your birds to enjoy the fruit versus you enjoy the fruit. But all these are available right now. Um, so willows, these are right up there with the top Lepidoptera hosts with 301. Right now we're not selling these, but these are great, and I want to call them out because a lot of people think willows have to be kind of those big weeping willows, which are actually not native and in some cases can be invasive. So a lot of our native willows are trees or shrubs, but a lot of them are shrubs. So there's this list here of what I termed loosely bush willows. So prairie, Bebs, shining, diamond. I think there's something over 10 of them that are native to Wisconsin, and they all kind of, to me, I'm sure a botanist can tell you the finer points of bush willow identification, but they look similar and can be used in landscape settings. They don't have a perfectly manicured form, but they do a lot of good work for pollinators. They're in very early so you can see with the bees shown here, for a lot of our early emerging bees, they're a great pollen source, and they also have a lot of different interests. So the pussy willows, you can see here, both their flowers and the uh, their namesake catkin. Actually, I'm not sure if those are still called catkins. I'm really sorry if plant people can identify what the gray form of this is called. I'm not sure. I apologize, folks. Pussy willows are a great option, and you see that a lot in landscaping. They're more traditional uh, landscape choice. Um, they grow really well in moist conditions, but most people do think of them as wet adapted. All willows is wet adapted, and they're not. They have a full range of conditions, and even if some, they may not be as popular in landscaping. But I always want people to think of, we get a lot of questions of, I can't fit an oak in my property, what can I do? And I always if the people have the right conditions for it, I think willows are a great way to go. Birches, there are a bunch of different species of birches. Personally, I only recommend river birch because it is the most resistant to bronze birch borer, which a lot of other birches are susceptible to. And all of the birches are great for seed sources for birds. Again, they have that structure that they're great. Pretty much all of these guys are great nesting site locations for birds. And river birch is awesome. I might be slightly biased by my own personal yard is very wet much of the year, and they handle that wet condition really well and have a relatively fast growth rate. And again, that's 276 species, so a lot of Lepidoptera are hosted by those guys. Maples are also a great choice. A lot of them have really vibrant color, as you can see here, but I think an underappreciated part of this is some of their flowers are actually pretty, they're not as showy as some of our other herbaceous flowers, but I think, as you can see here, some of them are quite cute. And they're a great early nectar and pollen source for bees and host a lot of our Lepidoptera. the seeds are eaten by some birds and mammals, and they often have really beautiful color that can have for this kind of year-round interest, all the way from the flowers to the fall color. So here are some examples, kind of different sizes, because I think most people are most familiar with our large maples. So our sugar maples that are really big, so they're your 75-foot full tree sized maples, that are still great if you have the room for them. But if you don't quite have the room for them, I really think people should check out mountain and striped maples. They both have kind of it. What I didn't realize is still a kind of a modified, not as traditional maple leaf. So a lot of us think of kind of that sugar maple leaf as kind of your traditional classic maple leaf pattern. But as you can see in the pictures here for both mountain maple and striped maple, they have this toothed leaf, and both of them have interesting flowers. Which I think is really interesting. I planted mountain maple last year, or 2 falls ago, and I've just been thinking it's so cool to watch it go through its life cycle and think I know what catkins and flowers of trees look like, and then see these guys and realize and take that next step of there's more diversity than I appreciated. Also, striped maple has this cool bark. You can see a picture of it there. So in both of the cases here, these are both mountain maple and striped maple can either be a shrub or a tree. So if you're wandering around in the forest, often you see them as shrubs, but often in cultivation, they are pruned into a single or multi-stem, but well-defined stem growth habit. They do well as understory trees. That's what they evolved as. So they typically grow under taller trees. So a lot of times they can fit into spaces that just can't put a oak or one of the larger maples. So I suggest people check them out if you might not have as big a space as you might be thinking maples need. So now, even though some of those were clearly on our border between shrubs and trees, now we're switching to things that are generally thought of as shrubs. Roses are awesome. They're both great hosts. They have showy flowers that a lot of people like aesthetically. The rose hips are often eaten by birds and other wildlife. And even though the roses look really similar, or to me, again, as a non-botanist, they are different ones are suitable for different growing conditions. So there's probably a rose that will work for your home. So here are just 3 examples that, as you can see from their height, sun condition, they're kind of similar. And you can still see, again, they're all pink flowers, but you can see some like wet, like our swamp rose, some like dry to medium, like meadow rose, and one even has kind of a climbing growth habit. So if you want to, there aren't a ton of climbing natives, so this is one opportunity to try a different form of natives. Dogwoods are awesome. I love them because they come in so many different shapes and sizes. So, and they just serve many different functions. So they are great Lepidoptera hosts. Over 100 species are hosted by these guys. There's one for a lot of different conditions. A lot of them are pollen sources for specialist bees and generalist bees. They are fed on by the berries are really loved by a lot of our birds, especially fueling up for migration. And ever since seeing creeping dogwood or bunchberry in the wild, I've just fallen in love with these guys, and that's the picture on the left here. So here are 3 examples that look a little different and have different types of interests. So pagoda dogwoods, again, this is kind of blurring the line between tree and shrub, and it can depend a little bit on how it's cultivated. Um, but it's this, um, it's a pretty, it can handle a lot of different sunlight conditions, and as long as it's not too far on the extremes for moisture. Red osier dogwood does great in wet areas. Again, in my yard, they do great in my partially flooded side yard. That is its own special place, and selective pressure for native plants. And then if you don't have room for a full shrub, think about creeping dogwood. So it's also called bunchberry. It's 6 to 12 inches tall, so it's a little tiny guys. If you don't look closely, you can think it's an herbaceous plant, so a non-woody plant. But if you look really closely in there, you can see little woody stems. But they still host a lot of Lepidoptera, still have great berries, and they they naturally natively grow in forests, and it means that they can be amazing ground cover in shady areas. Hazelnuts, also a great option. I love them because they have cool, uh, they have nuts that everything likes. I have to fight with the squirrels in my house between us getting hazelnuts and that the squirrels getting hazelnuts, which is fun. There are two different species in the area. Or native to Wisconsin. One is a little bit smaller. One's a little bit bigger. So the beaked hazelnut is a little bit smaller, and it's available now through us. American hazelnut is a little bit bigger, and has this. I couldn't find a good uh, copyright-free image of a beaked hazelnut, but they also have very interesting covering of their nuts. So that's another level of interest. And you can see that even after the nuts are ripe, they retain that kind of husk, which is kind of cool. Just a visual interest. I'm not going to go into a ton of flowers because most of them are not great host species. So you still need them in order to support Lepidoptera throughout their entire life cycle. But um, most of them aren't amazing hosts compared to our woody plants for Lepidoptera. So they're not quite as good at supporting birds as they look for insects to support their young. So some general rules of thumb for supporting biodiversity is making sure that you're aiming for a diversity of shapes, colors, and bloom times. So you want bloom times that cover the entire season. So back to that second slide. And also have different shapes, because a lot of our specialty bees have specialize in certain shapes of flowers. So by having a lot of different shapes and different colors, you can support different pollinators and try to support that diversity in your yard. But there are a couple of good examples, and some of them I think are a little bit maligned in the world, so I wanted to point them out. The first is goldenrod. So a lot of people think that this causes allergies. Typically, it doesn't. Usually, it's ragweed that looks kind of similar. They have the highest number of Lepidoptera. They're hosted by any herbaceous plant, at least native to Wisconsin, at 115 species. So they're kind of a great all-around plant because they host a lot of Lepidoptera and other insects. They offer nectar and pollen, and a lot of them are really long blooming, and there's probably one for almost any condition. The main thing to watch out for, and this is why they might have a little bit of a worse reputation, is that some of them are pretty aggressive. So Canada goldenrod is pretty aggressive, but there are less aggressive species, and so it's just something to watch out for. But it's not, or personally, I don't think it's a reason to write off all goldenrods. So here are some examples of some less aggressive goldenrods that live in a few different conditions. So Oldfield I like to highlight it because it's one of our relatively small native plants. So a lot of our native plants are 3 feet plus, and some of them are up to 8 feet. So a lot of them are really large. And it's sometimes overwhelming for people to try to incorporate them into kind of more traditional landscapes. So thinking about that concern people have, Oldfield is a great goldenrod to start mixing in with more traditional landscapes. Showy is kind of that more traditional height, but it's named showy for a good reason. It's very bright, very makes a real statement, which I really enjoy. And as you can see from the monarch here, they're just great. They're great for a lot of different butterflies that are hosted on other species as larvae, but as adults still need kind of those traditional flowers. And then leaved. This is one of 2 that are really good. That and zigzag are both really good examples of things you can grow in shade, or goldenrods to grow in shade. And this elm-leaved is a little less aggressive than zigzag, so that's why we're recommending it here. And then the other really great Lepidoptera host is herbaceous and therefore a lot smaller is asters. So a lot of them are long blooming. Again, they're diverse enough so they can be found in a lot of different conditions. You just have to look at matching up the right species of aster to your conditions. They're a great pollen and nectar source, and some of them are good. They have seed heads that birds eat, and that's also true of goldenrods, actually. So here are some examples. So big-leafed is a great shade plant that we're carrying right now. I like it, and it's growing in my yard as a ground cover. So sometimes there aren't a lot of things that grow in shade that are both ground covers and have and host plants and have flowers. So trying to find that multi-use plant, big-leafed aster is a great choice. In the past, we've carried both aromatic and calico asters, and they're both really good. It kind of depends on what you're interested in aesthetically. So there's a whole group of asters that are white, a whole group that are blue to purple, and also some have this more cluster shape versus kind of, I don't know how you describe calico aster, but that shape is the alternative. So it depends on what your aesthetic is, but also your growing conditions. But usually between the many species of aster, you can kind of work to match them up. Because I didn't have time to go, I wanted to make sure everybody had time for questions. I didn't have time to go through the other good options. So these guys aren't quite as good, but they're the next tier down in that in scientific studies on species that plant species that host a lot of Lepidoptera species, and also are pollen and nectar sources in most cases. So Joe Pye weed, those guys are great. That's available in our plant sale right now. Strawberries, a lot of people don't think of them this way, but they are great, both for birds like the berries and a lot of there are specialty bees that are specialized on strawberries, and our native sunflowers are kind of the next highest level of host plant of our herbaceous, just after asters. So these are great choices. We're selling Joe Pye weed and showy sunflower currently. And with that, I want to open it up to anybody's questions. Feel free to ask a specific or as general question as you like. We have a few other people here who can also answer questions. And yeah, I welcome anything, no matter how specific it is to your yard. We want to help.
Hi, Jennifer. Thank you so much for presenting. It was super cool. I just had a question about oak trees.
Mm-hmm.
Um, why do they have to grow so damn slow? Freaking, I mean,
Um, some of them are better
I,
than others.
okay, yeah, I planted a swamp oak that I got from a county, and the thing grew like 6 inches in the last five years. Maybe I have it in the wrong spot, but I mean, how big does an oak tree need to be really helping the environment, helping these insects? I mean, do they
Well,
have to
because
be full size?
no, no, no. That's a good thing of thinking about it native plants this way is basically any size helps. So like imagine a caterpillar living on an oak tree. A small oak tree is still a lot for a caterpillar. Um, so um, so even if it's like the pretty small for an oak tree, it's still pretty big in biomass compared to a lot of our other native plants. So yeah. So be patient. It's still doing good work.
Okay, yeah, I have 66 bare root trees on order. A lot of the ones you covered, and I'm really looking forward to creating the biodiversity that's needed.
That's great to
So
hear.
is this going to be something I can watch later? Because I kind of missed part of it. I was trying to set up my phone and stuff, and it wasn't
Yeah,
working.
yeah, for sure.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you so much again.
Thank you. Um, yeah, feel free to unmute yourselves or um, turn your cameras on. This is such a small group that, yeah, feel free to ask questions and have this be um, more direct than it doesn't have to be a giant audience or anything like that. Um, or I'm just gonna start calling on people. I know some of you. I'm just gonna start calling on you.
Jen, I just want to make a plug for when we talk about insects and leps. I just want to make a plug for moths as well.
Yes.
We tend to think of butterflies and the
Mhm.
caterpillars for butterflies because we see them during the day, but moths, many of them are nocturnal, and so we don't
Mhm.
see them during the day. And I think of those as sort of like our third shift pollinators that are doing a lot of their work when the butterflies are just chilling at night. So I just wanted to add that plug.
Yeah, no,
That's a great point.
exactly. And for birds, in a lot of places there are more moth larvae than butterfly larvae. So if you want to support the birds, you want to be supporting both of them. And a lot of the same species of woody plants support both moths and butterflies. So but that's a really good point, and we need them in order to be able to support birds and full diversity of pollinators.
Yeah, I watched a bluebird nest on one of the Ozaki Washington Land Trust properties. And these pair of bluebirds were bringing in, I mean, they were bringing in dozens of insects every 5 minutes. I mean, you really need a lot of insects to feed these baby birds. It's pretty incredible. I
Yep.
don't think people realize how many insects it takes to feed these babies. And so it's so important to stress yeah, these woody plants that are native. And I think native is the key, right? And
Yes.
that's what just burns me, that these landscape companies just don't even offer that. So getting the word out is super important. I really hope we can get this movement started and just like rewild this whole state and just the whole country. I'm super excited about my property. It's very small. So, but this is very inspiring that you're doing this. I didn't realize that you were into this, and I'm really grateful that you're presenting this. So I just want to say
Yes.
thank you again. I don't want to be too excited, but I'm pretty excited.
That's great. And to that point, to of incorporating native trees, one thing. So right now we're doing a program or a project expanding the MODIS telemetry system, so tracking birds, but also doing plantings at each of the sites. And what has been really fun about that is talking with folks in especially at municipalities who really don't think. So city foresters and parks folks who have never really thought about native versus not native. So a lot of them use as street trees, not native trees as street trees, but they've been really receptive to once they started thinking about it, and especially when there was a little money attached to it, it really helped people start thinking that way. And it wasn't a hard sell at all. I wasn't sure what to expect, but people were really open to start thinking about it. Like here in Port, the city foresters started using oak trees as street trees here, which is pretty cool, and basswood, and there are a lot of great street trees that are native, and starting to think that way, I think is a really good step.
Yeah, we got to change the mindset. Absolutely. I mean, I just got aware of this in the last year or so. I'm a photographer, so I've been photographing insects and birds, and I just started learning about it, and I was just like, it was like a light bulb went off. Like, oh my God, I have to plant all native stuff and get rid of all my other stuff. And I just ordered all these trees, and I want to plant all these flowers, and it's just so exciting because I did plant a bunch of stuff last year, and I couldn't believe how many more types of bees and stuff. There's like so many of these little native bees. It's just incredible. And I saw some swallowtail caterpillars on some plants and monarchs, of course. And it's just, if you like nature, it's really, it just blows up when you do this. I mean, it exponentially expands the amount of things you can find.
Yeah,
instead of being a desert. Yeah.
As we talk a little bit about planting for birds, I think that the emphasis today was so important to be on trees and shrubs and the caterpillars that they produce for the baby birds. But keep in mind that those herbaceous plants that are well suited to residential properties and their flower beds serve a really important role for the birds that stick around in the winter time. Seed heads, and I know that Jenn mentioned a couple of them, but I have found that it's very important not to cut back the garden in the fall, to leave those seed heads up. And I have in the past fed birds from a bird feeder, but they actually seem to prefer going to the native plant seed heads before they come to the feeder. And I've had enough of those seed heads that last through February. So things like lavender hyssop are amazing. Ironweed, asters, as Jenn mentioned, Joe Pye weed. There's a whole range of and coneflowers, black-eyed Susans. So all of those herbaceous plants serve an important bird feeding role at the other end of the growing season.
Yeah, it's so hard to talk about this holistically, and that was the real challenge of putting this together, is try to how do you cover it all and have it make coherent sense, when really what we need is to start mimicking natural ecosystems as much as we can. But that's a really complicated message. But just what you're saying, Jill, is what you want to do is be able to support the insects that they need, the berries that they need to refuel, the seeds over the winter, because we have all of these birds doing different strategies. And I chose to focus on insects because that's something that a lot of pretty much all the birds need in spring and into summer, feeding young. But once you get into fall and winter, that's a whole nother chunk of stuff that you need. But if we just need to start mimicking nature.
Yeah. Well, I think that the presentation that you have was incredibly important, because most of us do not know of. I didn't. I mean, I got educated through knowing you better, but many people do not understand the major role that the trees and shrubs play. And for people who are busy and or are not gardeners, those are, as you have pointed out many times, those are easy fixes for your yard. Plant a tree, plant some shrubs, and you're helping the chicks and everybody else. So yeah.
And resist the urge to clean up your yard in the fall and cut everything down and rake everything up. And that's a huge thing that people are just like, they're so focused on this, like everything has to look perfect. And I don't like the perfect look. It makes me crazy. I like the crazy look with all the, all the different flowers in my lawn. I plant clover on purpose. I know it's not native, but it's still, honeybees aren't either. But, just letting anything, the wild look is really, I don't know. I'm really surprised that people are accept that as the norm, like the green deserts, I call them. And yeah, once I learned that, you shouldn't be cutting everything down and raking everything up, and, it just made sense. And I just, well, don't do it. It's hard. It's hard to really.
Yeah, and if you watch birds, it's hard to argue when you see towhees and our migrating sparrows just digging around in the leaves, and like that's where they're hanging out. That's what they're doing, is like getting in the leaf litter and making a giant mess, which is so fun to watch. But that's why they need that.
I wanted to say just one thing as a native gardener novice. That you can start small, and this group, I'm biased, but can really help you move along with your knowledge and your design, and you can go as slow or as fast as you want in this adventure.
Yeah, I've gotten a lot of inspiration. I've joined like several gardening groups, but there's one in particular, organic gardening in native yards, that just the people are amazing. You can ask anything and they're super supportive, and there's a couple gurus in there that are just, and then there's some apps that you can identify plants with. Picture This is one that it tells you if it's native and all these different information about it. There's a lot of things out there you can use, and tools and support groups, and I joined Wild Ones this year, and so I think, yeah, starting off small, because I'm pretty overwhelmed right now. I've got Native Niche coming over to do a consultation. I don't know if you know Jamie Sue Dupree with Native Niche, but she's going to help me go through my yard a little bit and give me some ideas and stuff. So, there's, we just need to expand and get the awareness out and have more tools for people, I think. And hopefully that's going to be the future. Just kind of wake people up, because I had a landscape company that did a little work for me, and now I'm getting emails like, oh, we're going to come and spray your yard to get rid of all the insects. And I just why did I hire this? I needed to go to like therapy after reading this email. I was just so upset about it. Like, really? Come on.
Yeah.
So, sorry, I don't want to do.
Nicole, I saw that you unmuted. Did you have a question?
No, I was really just going to say that I am so grateful for you, because I never ever would have had the bravery to start.
Good. That's great to hear.
And they're here every year too, so you can just do a little bit, ask them questions, do a little bit in the fall. Very handy to have you.
So for folks who don't know, this is my mom. So she gets to, in case you didn't recognize from the second last name, which is a very common name, but so she gets, she gets the direct advice, but I would give the same advice to everyone. But my mom has more aesthetic requirements than I think most people do.
Yeah, it's funny. People don't think that native plants can fill that niche, and I think that's just a fallacy propagated by whoever. I don't know. But there's so many native plants, like you just showed native roses. I wasn't even aware of that, so I'm gonna put those in.
Yeah, there are a lot of species too. Like you'll find one for whatever growing condition. The only thing I would warn people about is if you have a bunch of deer, they do enjoy them. That's my problem with growing roses.
Yeah, the deer, yeah, they're always going to be a problem, I guess. But
Yeah.
um, well, I don't have any more questions. I mean, I could go on forever, but I suppose everybody's got stuff to do tonight.
Okay. So if you're from, hopefully we'll see you guys again in a couple weeks. We'll have another native plant related one, but from a different perspective, this time with folks doing restoration and someone from Johnson Nursery. So getting kind of the professional perspective. So bring your questions again, and you'll be able to ask people who restore land and do amazing things. So if you've been out to Mequon Nature Preserve, Nicole leads that their restoration and River Revitalization Foundation along the Milwaukee River. So great work, great guys. I'm really looking forward to it, and hopefully we'll see you in a couple weeks. Okay, thanks.
Sounds good. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jen. Bye.
Bye.